This is outrageous. We can't just sit here.
Sir, please calm down. We need you to stay seated.
Everyone, please remain in your seats.
What's happening?
Dr. James Mitchell stood in the first-class lounge of Atlanta's International Airport, clutching his platinum frequent flyer card and a boarding pass for Flight 821 to New York. As the chief investment officer of Henderson Capital Partners, he had made $43 million in profit for his firm that quarter alone. His tailored Navy Armani suit cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. His Rolex gleamed under the lounge's crystalline lights. He was not just wealthy. He was powerful, respected, and influential in circles that shaped the American economy. But today would change everything. Today, his wealth and status would mean absolutely nothing to two security officers who saw only his skin color. Subscribe to Echo Story for stories that expose corporate America's darkest truths. Like this video if you believe a man's character should define him, not the color of his skin. James gathered his briefcase, unaware that in the next 5 hours, his life would become a cautionary tale that would shake Wall Street and spark conversations that would echo far beyond the confines of that aircraft cabin. As James approached Gate 15 with his boarding pass extended, a gate agent named Patricia looked up at him with visible suspicion. She examined his documents with exaggerated scrutiny, scanning his boarding pass multiple times as if searching for something wrong. Other passengers, predominantly white and Asian, walked past her with barely a glance. But James, a 6'2" black man in an expensive suit, was treated as a potential threat. Patricia called over a security officer, a large white man named Derek, whispering something that James couldn't hear but could feel a wave of suspicion that seemed almost physically present. Derek approached James and asked him to step aside. The implication was clear. Something about James seemed off, dangerous, untrustworthy. James, who had traveled business class or first class hundreds of times, who had flown with senators and federal judges, felt his stomach drop. This was the moment when his achievements meant nothing. This was the moment when he was reduced to a stereotype. He showed Derek his ID, his business card, his frequent flyer status. None of it seemed to matter. Derek's jaw remained set, and his hand hovered near his belt. The power dynamic had shifted in seconds. Patricia informed James that his ticket appeared suspicious and that she suspected fraud. She claimed that his boarding pass didn't match the manifest, though when James asked to see evidence, she refused to show him anything concrete. Derek demanded to know where James worked, how he could afford first class, and why his name was flagged in their system, but there was no flag. James knew this. His heart pounded as he remained composed, explaining that he was the chief investment officer of Henderson Capital Partners, one of the most prestigious investment firms in America. Patricia's eyes narrowed further. She turned to Derek and said, loudly for other passengers to hear, he's probably traveling on a stolen card. The accusation hung in the air like a physical blow. Other first-class passengers began staring, some whispered. A woman clutched her purser. James felt something inside him fracture. He had worked his entire life to escape stereotypes, to build a reputation of integrity and excellence, only to be reduced to a criminal suspect because of the color of his skin. The humiliation was complete, but it was only the beginning. Derek informed James that he would need to move to economy class pending an investigation. James protested calmly, explaining that this was clearly discriminatory, that his credentials were legitimate, that he had done nothing wrong. But Derek's expression hardened. He said that if James didn't comply voluntarily, security would escort him off the plane and potentially press charges for traveling on fraudulent documentation. It was an empty threat, but it was terrifying nonetheless. James realized that arguing further would only make things worse. He had seen enough news stories about black men standing their ground with authority figures to know that escalation rarely ended well. So he gathered his briefcase and his carry-on, his movements controlled despite the rage building inside his chest. As he turned to leave the first-class cabin, he caught the eye of an elderly white man who shook his head in disapproval, not at James, but at the situation. That small gesture of solidarity barely registered through the fog of humiliation. James walked through the first-class cabin, feeling every eye on him, feeling the weight of being marked as a problem, as suspicious, as someone who didn't belong in spaces of excellence and privilege. As James moved from first class through the cabin divider toward economy, something shifted in him. The rational part of his brain recognized that this was discrimination, that it was illegal, that it was wrong. But another part of him, a deeper, more primal part, felt ashamed. He had internalized the accusation. He had allowed their suspicion to become his truth. His legs felt heavy as he walked down the narrow aisle of economy class, past rows of cramped seats and tired passengers. A flight attendant, a young Asian woman, made eye contact with him, and her expression softened with what looked like pity. That pity cut deeper than Patricia's accusations. James found his assigned seat in row 38, the furthest back in the economy section. He sat down slowly, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like a costume, a lie, a pretense that he had never actually belonged in first class at all. Around him, passengers adjusted themselves, creating space, avoiding him. A mother pulled her child closer. A man next to James shifted his body away. He was radioactive now. He was the problem. He was the security threat that two gate agents had correctly identified. The plane began to push back from the gate, and James pressed his forehead against the window, trying to breathe through the panic and rage that threatened to consume him completely. Before airplane mode engaged, James's phone buzzed with messages. His assistant Marcus had texted urgently, "Where are you?" Board meeting about the quantum merger started early. James's fingers trembled as he typed a response. He considered lying, considered saying he was stuck in traffic or delayed by weather. Instead, he typed the truth. Being discriminated against at airport. Long story, I'll be there in a few hours. He hit send and watched as the dots appeared indicating Marcus was typing back. Within seconds, the response came, "What? Should I call someone? Do you need help?" James stared at the screen. What could anyone do? Call a lawyer? Call the police? Report it to whom? The airline would probably destroy evidence. The security footage would mysteriously be unavailable. He had seen this pattern play out 1,000 times in the news. This was the terrifying reality of being a black professional in America. Even when you reached the top, you were never truly safe. Another message came from his wife, Jennifer. "How's your flight, love?" He couldn't tell her, not yet. Not while he was still processing the shock of what had happened. He put his phone in airplane mode and closed his eyes, feeling completely alone despite being surrounded by hundreds of people.
Maya sat frozen in her seat, humiliation washing over her as every passenger in first class and many in the forward sections of economy stared at her. She had done nothing wrong, provided all requested documentation, and was being treated like a criminal for the offense of being young and black in first class. The businessman pulled out his phone and started recording. "This is discriminatory treatment and I'm documenting everything," he announced loudly. Jennifer's face flushed red. "Sir, put that phone away or you'll be removed as well." Within 2 minutes, airport security arrived at the aircraft, 2 officers who looked uncomfortable with the situation. The senior officer, a woman named Officer Neuer, Patricia Moore, approached Maya's seat. "Miss, we need you to come with us to sort out a ticketing issue." Maya's voice trembled despite her efforts to stay calm. "There is no ticketing issue. My ticket is valid, it's in my name, and I've provided all documentation requested. This flight attendant is racially profiling me." Jennifer interrupted. "That's ridiculous. This has nothing to do with race. She's being removed because her ticketing situation is suspicious." Officer Moore examined Maya's documents and frowned. "Ma'am, these documents appear completely valid. The ticket is in her name, issued properly, and there's no indication of fraud." "What exactly is suspicious?" Jennifer had painted herself into a corner but refused to back down. "I have discretion over passenger safety in my cabin. I want her removed. Now." What none of them knew was that James Sterling had been watching the entire confrontation unfold on the airport's comprehensive security camera system. Global Airport. Systems had installed state-of-the-art surveillance in every airport they managed, with centralized monitoring capabilities that allowed executives to observe operations across their entire network. James had been reviewing security feeds from Dallas-Fort Worth as part of a routine operational check when he noticed a commotion in the first-class cabin of the London-bound flight. He had zoomed in on the camera feed and felt his blood turn to ice when he recognized his daughter being confronted by the flight attendant. James watched as Jennifer called security, watched as other passengers defended Maya, watched as his brilliant, accomplished, kind daughter was subjected to humiliation for no reason other than Jennifer's prejudice. James Sterling was a methodical man who believed in systems and processes, but he was also a father who had promised his daughter she could be anything she wanted in this world. Watching her dignity be stripped away while she sat helpless in that airplane seat broke something fundamental in him. He reached for his phone and made a decision that would shock the aviation industry. James called his chief operating officer, a woman named Rebecca Torres who had worked with him for 15 years and understood that when the CEO used his emergency tone, you acted first and asked questions later. Rebecca, this is James. I need you to initiate Protocol Delta immediately. Across all 152 facilities in our network. Rebecca's voice reflected her shock. Sir, Protocol Delta is for catastrophic security emergencies. It shuts down all airport operations. Are you certain? James's voice was cold and final. I'm watching my daughter being racially profiled and forcibly removed from an aircraft at DFW while airport security stands by and enables discrimination. I tried to build a company that valued dignity and equal treatment. We've failed. We shut down every airport we manage until we've had time to review how this was allowed to happen and implement changes ensuring it never happens again. Initiate Protocol Delta now. Rebecca knew better than to argue when James used that tone. She also knew that shutting down 152 airports would ground approximately 40,000 flights, strand millions of passengers, and create economic chaos measured in billions of dollars. But she also knew that James didn't make these decisions lightly. Initiating now, sir. Estimated shutdown time 7 minutes. James kept watching the security feed as he waited for the protocol to activate, his fury building as he watched Jennifer smirk while Maya was escorted off the aircraft. On the airplane, Maya gathered her belongings with as much dignity as she could muster while passengers around her expressed outrage on her behalf. Several had recorded the entire incident and were already posting it to social media with hashtags about airline discrimination. The businessman across the aisle handed her his business card. I'm an attorney specializing in civil rights. Please contact me. What just happened to you is actionable discrimination and I'll represent you pro bono. Maya thanked him quietly. Her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall in front of Jennifer. As she walked down the aisle escorted by the uncomfortable security officers, Jennifer called after her. Next time, fly in the section you can actually afford. The cruelty of that final comment, delivered loud enough for everyone to hear, was captured on multiple phones and would soon be viewed by millions. Maya reached the jetway and finally allowed herself to breathe, the weight of humiliation settling on her shoulders. Officer Moore looked at her with genuine sympathy. Miss, I'm really sorry about this. That was completely inappropriate. If you want to file a complaint, I'll provide a statement supporting you. Maya nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. And then, suddenly, alarms began sounding throughout the terminal. The airport's public address system crackled to life with an emergency announcement that would soon be repeated at 151 other airports across North America. Attention all airport personnel and passengers. We are implementing an immediate operational shutdown due to a critical security protocol activation. All flights are grounded. All passengers must deplane from aircraft. All terminals will be evacuated to secured holding areas. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The effect was instantaneous chaos. Passengers on Maya's flight began shouting questions, demanding to know what was happening. Jennifer stood at the front of the cabin looking confused and angry about the delay. At gates throughout DFW and simultaneously at 151 other airports from Seattle to Miami, from New York to Los Angeles, aircraft were stopped mid-taxi, boarding was halted, and passengers were told to gather their belongings and evacuate terminals. Air traffic controllers across the continent scrambled to ground planes mid-flight and divert them to airports not managed by global airport systems. The aviation system, which normally operated with precision timing, descended into controlled chaos. News networks interrupted programming to report on what appeared to be a massive coordinated security threat affecting airports across North America. Nobody yet understood that this unprecedented shutdown had been triggered by one man's response to his daughter's mistreatment. Within 15 minutes, Maya found herself in a secured passenger holding area, along with thousands of other confused and frightened travelers who had been evacuated from DFW terminals. She still didn't understand what was happening or why the timing coincided so precisely with her removal from the aircraft. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Where are you right now? Are you safe?" Maya replied with her location and confirmation she was safe, adding that she had been removed from her flight due to a discriminatory flight attendant. James's response was immediate. "I know. I saw everything. Stay where you are. I'm coming. To you." And Maya, "I'm so sorry this happened to you. It should never have happened. I'm going to make sure it never happens to anyone else." Maya stared at her phone, confused by her father's words. How could he have seen everything? And what did he mean about making sure it never happened again? The questions were interrupted by the arrival of airport police, but not to detain her. Instead, the police chief himself approached her with an expression of profound embarrassment. "Miss Sterling, I need to apologize on behalf of this airport for the discriminatory treatment you received. Your father has made it very clear that what happened to you represents a systemic failure of our commitment to equal treatment. He's requested that you be escorted to his office where he's coordinating the response to this situation." The walk to her father's office took Maya through administrative corridors she had never seen before, past frantic employees coordinating the massive operational shutdown. She saw wall screens displaying real-time status from dozens of airports, all showing the same red "Operations Suspended" indicator. When she entered her father's office, James turned from the wall of screens and pulled her into a fierce hug. "I'm so sorry you had to experience that, sweetheart. No child should face that kind of hatred." Maya pulled back, confused. "Dad, what's happening? Why are the airports shutting down?" James guided her to sit down and explained his decision, with the calm logic that characterized all his major choices. "Maya, you were subjected to blatant racial discrimination by an employee working in a facility my company manages. Our security staff witnessed it and did nothing to stop it. Our systems allowed it to happen. That tells me we have a fundamental cultural failure across our entire operation. I've shut down all 152 airports we manage until we can conduct a comprehensive review of how discrimination is reported, investigated, and prevented. We're going to use this moment to force systemic change across the entire industry." Maya stared at her father in shock, processing the magnitude of what he was saying. "Dad, you shut down 152 airports because of what happened. To me?" James nodded firmly. "Not just because of what happened to you, although that would be reason enough. Because of what happens to thousands of people like you every day in these airports. The black passengers who are pulled aside for extra security screening at higher rates. The Muslim families who are stared at and whispered about. The disabled travelers who are treated like inconveniences. The LGBTQ passengers who face hostile comments from staff. All of it happens in facilities that I'm responsible for managing. I've had the power to address it and I haven't done enough. That ends today." He turned to the screens showing grounded flights and stranded passengers. "Yes, this shutdown is going to cost billions of dollars. Yes, millions of people are inconvenienced. But you know what costs more? The cost to human dignity when we allow discrimination to operate unchecked. The cost to trust when we tell people they're valued but then permit employees to treat them as less than human. The cost to my soul if I let what happened to my daughter slide because taking action would be expensive or complicated." James pulled up a video file on his computer. It was security footage of Jennifer's interaction with Maya, crystal clear and damning in its obvious discrimination. This is going to every news network. People need to see what routine discrimination looks like, and they need to see that there are consequences. Within an hour, the video of Maya's removal went viral, not because of the airport shutdowns, but because it so perfectly captured the casual cruelty of everyday racism. Jennifer's tone, her assumptions, her final cruel comment, all of it resonated with millions of people who had experienced similar treatment in various contexts. The hashtag #ShutItDownForDignity began trending as people debated whether James Sterling's response was appropriate or excessive. Some argued that shutting down 152 airports was a disproportionate response that punished innocent travelers for one employee's actions. Others countered that dramatic action was necessary to force industries to take discrimination seriously when incremental reforms had failed for decades. The debate raged across social media, news networks, and corporate boardrooms. Airlines, whose flights were grounded, issued statements condemning discrimination while frantically calculating their losses. Pilot unions and flight attendant unions released competing statements, some supporting the shutdown as a wake-up call about industry culture, while others criticized it as collective punishment. The FAA scrambled to assess whether they had authority to override the shutdown or if global airport systems had the contractual right to suspend operations. The legal questions alone would take months to fully resolve, but in the moment, all that mattered was that air travel across North America had ground to a halt. The pressure on James to rescind the shutdown order came from every direction. The Secretary of Transportation called personally to demand he restore operations immediately, threatening federal intervention. Airline CEOs warned of bankruptcy if the shutdown extended beyond a few hours. Business groups calculated the economic damage in the billions per day. James listened to all of them and gave the same response. "We will restore operations when we have implemented meaningful changes to prevent discrimination, not before. I don't care if it takes a day or a week or a month. My daughter's dignity is not negotiable, and neither is anyone else's." He assigned teams to develop comprehensive anti-discrimination protocols, including mandatory bias training for all airport employees, passenger advocacy boards with authority to investigate complaints and recommend terminations, body cameras for security personnel, and substantial financial penalties for facilities that showed patterns of discriminatory treatment. The protocols were developed in consultation with civil rights organizations and drew on best practices from other industries. James made it clear that any facility that refused to implement the new standards would have their management contract terminated immediately. He was using his company's market power to force changes that regulators had been unable or unwilling to mandate. The airlines and airport authorities could either accept his terms or find another management company, and everyone knew there wasn't another company with global airport systems capabilities. Jennifer Hartley watched the news coverage from her apartment, her career imploding in real time as the video of her treatment of Maya played on every network. The airline had terminated her employment within hours of the shutdown, issuing a statement condemning her actions and promising comprehensive retraining for all crew members. Jennifer's name and face were now permanently associated with discrimination, making her unemployable in aviation and most other industries. She attempted to give interviews claiming she hadn't meant to be discriminatory, that she was just following security protocols, but the video evidence was too clear. Her tone, her words, her treatment of Maya versus other passengers showed obvious disparate treatment based on race. Jennifer lost her job, her reputation, and eventually her home as the financial consequences mounted. She became the face of workplace discrimination. Her case studied in corporate training programs as an example of how personal bias could destroy careers and companies. The severity of her fall served as a warning to other employees across industries that discriminatory behavior would no longer be quietly tolerated or resolved with token gestures. There would be real consequences, immediate and permanent. Jennifer had thought she was protecting the exclusivity of first class. Instead, she had catalyzed one of the most significant civil rights moments in modern aviation history. The airports remained shut down for 72 hours, while global airport systems implemented emergency anti-discrimination protocols across all facilities. The economic cost was staggering, estimated at over $12 billion in lost revenue, canceled reservations, and economic disruption. James personally absorbed much of the cost, using his company's cash reserves to compensate for lost fees. and revenues during the shutdown. He viewed it as an investment in transforming industry culture, expensive but necessary. When operations finally resumed, every airport managed by Global Airport Systems had new signage in terminals declaring zero tolerance for discrimination, new reporting mechanisms for passengers to lodge complaints with independent review, and new training requirements for every employee who interacted with the public. The changes were comprehensive and mandatory. Airlines operating in these airports had to agree to parallel reforms in their own policies or face restricted access to gates and facilities. The leverage that Global Airport Systems had as the manager of 152 airports gave James the power to force changes that would have taken years to achieve through traditional regulatory processes. The shutdown had been disruptive and costly, but it had created urgency for reforms that had languished on corporate to-do lists for decades. Maya's story became a catalyst for broader conversations about discrimination in travel and public accommodations. She received thousands of messages from people sharing their own experiences of being profiled, questioned, or mistreated while traveling. Many were from young people, particularly young people of color, who had been made to feel like they didn't belong in certain spaces despite having every right to be there. Maya decided to use her unwanted fame to advocate for systemic changes, testifying before Congress about the need for federal anti-discrimination standards in transportation and working with civil rights organizations to develop model policies for the industry. She delayed her enrollment at Oxford by a year to focus on this advocacy work, recognizing that she had a unique platform and responsibility to push for changes that would benefit millions. The experience had been traumatic, but Maya was determined to ensure that some good came from it. She launched a foundation providing legal support to travelers who experienced discrimination, helping them navigate complaint processes and connect with attorneys. The foundation was funded by settlement money from the lawsuit she filed against the airline and Jennifer personally, money she could have kept but chose to use for advocacy. Maya understood that her father's wealth and power had given her recourse that most discrimination victims didn't have, and she wanted to extend that protection to others. The aviation industry adapted to the new reality created by the shutdown, though not without resistance. Some airlines and airport authorities chafed under the new protocols, viewing them as expensive and burdensome. But the market dynamics created by Global Airport Systems' dominance meant they had little choice but to comply. Passengers noticed the changes quickly. Reports of discriminatory treatment dropped by 68% in the first year after the shutdown, not because discrimination disappeared, but because reporting mechanisms were more accessible and employees knew there would be real consequences for discriminatory behavior. The body cameras worn by security personnel created accountability that changed interactions between staff and passengers. The passenger advocacy boards provided independent oversight that had been missing from the old complaint systems controlled by the same airlines and airports accused of permitting discrimination. The reforms weren't perfect. There were still incidents and failures, but the trajectory was toward improvement rather than stagnation. Other industries watched the aviation reforms and began implementing similar changes, recognizing that demographic shifts and social movements meant the old tolerance for discrimination was no longer sustainable. The shutdown had demonstrated that discrimination wasn't just morally wrong but also economically risky, potentially costly enough to threaten entire business models if not addressed proactively. Years after the shutdown, Maya graduated from Oxford with highest honors and returned to the United States to work in aerospace engineering, eventually founding her own company developing sustainable aviation technologies. She remained an advocate for civil rights in travel, speaking regularly about her experience and the systemic changes that had followed. The story of the shutdown became part of business school curricula as an example of how leadership could drive cultural change through decisive action even when the costs were enormous. James Sterling's decision to shut down 152 airports remained controversial, with some viewing it as an appropriate response to systemic discrimination, and others seeing it as an overreaction that punished innocent people for one employee's misconduct. But the results were undeniable. The aviation industry's culture had shifted in ways that incremental reforms had failed to achieve for decades. Discrimination still existed because prejudice was a human failing that couldn't be eliminated by policy alone, but the systemic tolerance for discrimination had been disrupted. Employees knew they would face real consequences. Passengers knew they had real recourse. The balance of power had shifted slightly but meaningfully toward dignity and equality. The shutdown had been expensive, disruptive, and controversial, but it had proven that transformative change was possible when leaders were willing to prioritize values over convenience. Today, the legacy of the shutdown lives on in the policies that govern how airports and airlines treat passengers. The reforms implemented during those 72 hours became industry standards, adopted even by facilities not managed by global airport systems, because competitive pressure and passenger expectations demanded it. Jennifer Hartley's name remained, a cautionary tale about how individual prejudice could have catastrophic consequences not just for oneself but for entire industries. Maya Sterling became a symbol of resilience and transformation, someone who had experienced discrimination and used it as motivation to create systemic change rather than simply seeking personal justice. Her father's decision to shut down 152 airports remained one of the most dramatic corporate actions in modern history, debated in boardrooms and classrooms as an example of how power could be wielded for moral purposes even, when doing so, contradicted short-term financial interests. The story raised fundamental questions about what corporations owed to society beyond maximizing shareholder value, whether there were some principles worth defending, even at enormous cost, and how transformative change happened in industries resistant to incremental reform. This story, shared with you on Echo Story, reminds us that dignity is not negotiable, that power without purpose is empty, and that sometimes the most dramatic actions are necessary to force institutions to live up to their stated values rather than just paying them lip service while discrimination continues unchecked.